right. Well, welcome to the Big Brown Gadfly, where we give a hard time to people who need to be given a hard time, just like Socrates' horse. Now, I'm going to be discussing something very specific today, which is the January 6th event that happened at the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. And I'm going to pose the question, what was January 6th worth? What was it worth to Democrats, and what was it worth to conservatives? And what was it worth to other groups? There are a lot of questions about this event. This event has been dragged out, and the people are getting a lot of mileage out of it. And I want to talk what we know about it, and also how to deal with the endless invocations of this event by people who have an agenda that they want to push along those lines. Okay. So a couple different announcements really quick that I wanted to make before I went on. One of which is that we have an event that's coming up on Wednesday, February 24th, called Your Conscience or Your Diploma by Metaxas, Zamirak, and Lopez. That's me, Eric Metaxas, and John Zamirak. That's going to be on Wednesday, February 24th at 7 p.m. The conference, Infiltrated, is going to be this February 6th from 1 p.m. to 5 p.m. That'll be a great event if you want to try to make that. The different authors who contributed to Church and State, which is all about the left-wing infiltration of the churches, are going to be speaking at that. You can go to the website there on the screen, gatekeepers.online.com, discount Lopez for that, and you'll get a little bit of a discount on the registration fee, which is good. The Big Brown Gadfly has a new permanent schedule, which is Thursdays at 8 p.m., 7 p.m. Central Standard Time. That's when this show that I'm doing right now is going to actually be broadcast. This is just kind of a preliminary airing of it. And then the last thing is you can join the discussion group online, www.gatekeepersonline.com/the group/the Big Brown Gadfly/discussion. All right, so Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is a Puerto Rican from the Bronx, or supposedly she's from the Bronx. She's made a lot of news because she keeps on talking about this event that happened on January 6th. And I'm going to use her as our segue into the discussion. What was January 6th worth? What did it mean for this event to take place, and why are people talking about it so much? I actually thought that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was an interesting political character when she first burst on the scene. I often cited her and said conservatives need to learn a little bit from her. And I think we did, because actually we had a whole bunch of very colorful people who have dazzling, daring online presences who did get elected to Congress, and they are now being targeted by this huge hate mob of people who are trying to drive them out of Congress just for being the way that they are. But any love affair that I had with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez really just ended this week. I thought it was absolutely unconscionable that she implied that Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz wanted to murder her, had some plan, and actually organized people and determined their expressed opinions about the election because they wanted to incite a mob to murder her. That was just an insane assertion to make. That's far worse than anything that Marjorie Greene has said, honestly. I don't think that Marjorie Greene actually believes that Jews have space lasers that are setting forest fires. She probably just liked or shared a couple of those things in the past. But Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez this week basically made absolutely unconscionable and delusional claims that Ted Cruz wanted to have her murdered. And then on top of it, to say that they were the equivalent of sex abusers because they did not agree with the outcome of the election. This goes beyond the pale. This is what Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said. She did an entire lengthy Instagram recording in which she said that she was a sex abuse survivor, and the way that Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley were treating her was similar to the way that abusers treat people who survive sexual abuse. So she's basically saying that not only did Ted Cruz want to murder her and actively set out to conspire to have a mob come and murder her, she also is comparing him to a rapist and also a traitor and a terrorist. These are things that should not be acceptable from sitting members of Congress. We don't. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez may be someone who has a lot of energy, but she might also be someone who is scarred by past experiences that she has and reacts to trauma with this unstable, erratic behavior. But that's not the behavior that we need from someone who's in elected office. If you are an elected lawmaker, you are supposed to be resilient enough and sober enough to make decisions such as whether to go to war or whether to ban abortion or how to deal with a border crisis where there are people who are intercepted at the border who don't have their parents. You have to deal with life and death issues, and you cannot be this emotional and unstable. But really what got her, it seems, what staggered her finally was the fact that her representation of what happened on January 6th didn't really come across as accurate. Okay, now she's going to contest the things that Jack Posobiec put online to question her account of what happened on January 6th. She claims that she was terrified for her life and it was like a near-death experience, and her whole life passed before her eyes because she was trapped in a bathroom, worried that she was going to get killed. The accounts that came from other people that were able to prove their version of events were that she was in a building that was secure. It was removed from where most of the action was, and insurrectionists never made it to the hallway where she was, and the person who knocked on her door was a Capitol Guard policeman who, out of precaution, was asking her to relocate to somewhere where it was going to be even farther from where the instability was. So she basically, she told a war story, like the people in the army. I served in the army, and you always have people who kind of embellish the stories a little bit. She told a tall tale, and she got caught. And that seems to be what got her. I think that overall it was healthy for her to get caught with this and for her to be attacked as much as she is, because she clearly was on this path to milk that event and to exploit it and abuse it for everything it was worth for so long. She was not going to give up this issue. She was going to drag January 6th until it was finally going to totally undermine her own. Look at some of the things about January 6th that are just delusional that people have claimed. And I say this by first starting out that to say that I am half Filipino, and I remember very clearly when the Filipino people stormed the Malacanang Palace, which was where Ferdinand Marcos, the dictator, lived, and they were able to break past the soldiers, and he was whisked away in a helicopter, and that ended the dictatorship in the Philippines. That's something that Filipinos are proud of. My Filipino relatives are proud of that moment. There are moments like this that happen because government buildings where the ruler lives or where the legislature is housed, those are very symbolic things for people. Those are places that belong to the people. And so a storming of the Capitol, I don't begin by feeling like, oh my gosh, I have to be ashamed because this was terrorism. This is something that fits in very much with patterns of world history. America is not so unlike other countries. Other countries, when you have an elite that is detached, that is denying people their basic rights, and that is ignoring, turning a deaf ear to people's discontent, very often you have explosions like this, and often the target of people's discontent is something symbolic, like the Bastille, like Malacanang Palace, like Winter's Palace in Moscow. These things happen, okay? So I'm beginning by saying I don't look at this with shame right off the bat, okay? But all of that aside, here's what we are hearing. You have people like AOC who are claiming this was an insurrection. Now, Donald Trump's supporters are among the most heavily armed people in America. If they had wanted to start an insurrection, if that was their intent when they entered the Capitol Hill, the death toll would be larger. Okay, they would have used firearms. It's clear to me that because there was not a huge death toll and they didn't open fire en masse at the people in the Capitol, that this was not intended to be an insurrection. It wasn't an insurrection. So people have to stop letting people use that term. This was not an insurrection, okay? It was not a coup, all right? They came, they wanted to express their displeasure. They wanted to make their voice heard. before the people who were in the process of certifying a controversial vote, which had disputed results. And they left eventually, and basically Joe Biden got inaugurated as president. It wasn't a coup. It was something that wasn't that different from things that left-wing people supported, like occupying the Capitol building to protest Brett Kavanaugh, or occupying the Madison State House to protest against Governor Scott Walker. Because it wasn't a coup, it wasn't an insurrection, it had nothing to do with white supremacy. Let's pretend for a moment that we are critical race theorists, that we think like a classic critical race theorist. If you're going to read your Frantz Fanon and your Michel Foucault and your Homi Bhabha, and you're going to apply those theorists to this event, you would look at the space, because critical race theorists love to analyze space and symbolism. You would look at the space of the Capitol and you would say that is the apex of white supremacy. It's the Capitol building. It's Greco-Roman architecture. It is a building that is meant to house lawmakers who are empowered by a constitution that was written by people who owned slaves, and they were supposed to regulate land that's stolen from Indians. This is what a critical race theorist would think in their mind. So to say then that this insurrection was a white supremacist insurrection meant to attack black people or other races, it doesn't make any sense. It's ludicrous. It's delusional. So it wasn't an insurrection. It wasn't a coup. It had nothing to do with white supremacy. And lastly, it was not caused by things that Donald Trump said. The people who were gathered at January 6th, who expressed their discontent with the government, were individuals they made their decision. A lot of them, they had to scrape together their resources to travel to Washington, D.C. on that day. They made the decision because they have their own stance. Not feelings, but their own stance on where the government is going and how the government is treating their citizens. They're not zombies, and Donald Trump does not have the power to be able to force people to go do these things. And so the claims of the impeachment trial, all of the claims in the press are delusional. Again, not an insurrection, not a coup, not white supremacist. It was not caused by Donald Trump, and it was not terrorism. All right. What happened on January 6th was the result of people who have a very deep love of their country, who grew up with hearing stories of George Washington and the heroes of 1776. They heard stories about the Civil War and the Greatest Generation going off to fight the Nazis, and they carry that heritage with them. And so what they did, it's tragic that there were people who died and there were people who were injured, but it's understandable. It comes out of that history. It's not terrorism, okay? So given the fact that all of that is delusional, it just shouldn't surprise us that the Democrats are going to use this and try to get tons and tons of mileage out of it. Of course, we know that it's completely hypocritical because of what their stance was on street protests that got violent during the Black Lives Matter rallies. But what is it worth for them? I think that they're going to try to milk this event for as long as they can, because I've noticed that every single one of their censorious and totalitarian projects that they have been trying to push for years, they're now justifying, saying that these are necessary measures in order to respond to what we saw that happened on January 6th. I think that for us as conservatives, I'll speak as a conservative, it's good that the Democrats are going to try to get mileage over this, because it will bring home to people around the world the total disconnect between the images in front of them of what actually happened on that day and what the Democrats are saying. And the more that people are aware that there's this disconnect, that the kind of things that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez says are completely unfettered from reality, they're totally detached from reality, I think that's better in the end for us, because people that are awakened to the insanity are going to be a more effective political force than people who still hold out hope that something is going to save the Democrats from the extremism that they've gone towards. There are still sometimes, even I as a conservative, I hold out hope. I'm part of different organizations where I deal with leftists, and I try, I reach out to them. but your hopes are always going to be disappointed because this movement has become it's gone beyond self-correction. It's past the point of no return. So I think that for us, it's good that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez makes these outrageous statements, that she exaggerates and embellishes, and she's even caught fudging the details, because it brings so much awareness to how insane the Democrats are. Okay. Now, you have to ask the question, what was January 6th worth for conservatives? You look at it, and I think that many people would look at this and they would say it would have been better if there was no rally that day, because then you wouldn't have had this huge backlash. They wouldn't have had the pretext to try to impeach Donald Trump again. They wouldn't have had this ammunition to throw at us to try to continue to censor everybody and to label people terrorists. But I would resist that interpretation for a very simple reason. I think the Democrats would have called us terrorists and would have demonized us and would have demonized everybody who questioned the results of the election, whether or not there were 1 million people in Washington, D.C. They would not have given us any quarter, any leniency at all. So I don't think that we should begin by feeling that that the way that things went wrong on January 6th caused all of the repression. They were going to do this anyway. And they are using January 6th as a pretext, but that in a sense is going to weaken them over the long term rather than strengthen them, because every time they cite January 6th, there's more people here and there who are going to look at that and say, that's not what the image is. The death count doesn't make sense. The images don't match the kind of extremism they're talking about. And so I think that we shouldn't proceed with the assumption that somehow we brought worse things upon ourselves because of the fact that it was conservatives who gathered on January 6th. I think overall, in the end, it will be worth something for us to have gathered that many people in Washington, D.C., to see the massive crowds. Obviously, when you have that many people gathered in one place, there's a chance that things are going to go wrong, and that did happen here, and people did die, and that's a tragedy. But I think that if we hadn't gathered, if we hadn't had images of 1 million people, or however many there were, this huge mass of humanity who were all gathered together to say, we see what happened. We know that the government is lying to us. We are discontented and we are a force. If we hadn't had that moment, I think we would actually be worse off right now. And that's a harsh thing to say, but I do think it was worth something for us. And the people who were in the Capitol building, these legislators, for them to behave as if this was the worst thing in the world, for them to feel anxiety, for them to feel frightened, for them to feel attacked, it just demonstrates their arrogance, because all through 2020, people all across America had to deal with a feeling of anxiety at their job, in their neighborhoods, going shopping, just driving down the street, because everything broke down. And for the government to feel as though everyone else can deal with burning shopping malls and violent people screaming at you and threats coming in over social media, but as long as the government doesn't have to feel any threat, that is obscene to a certain degree. And I think over the long term, it will have accomplished something for the people in government to understand that they can also be made to feel the same fear and anxiety and instability that all of us feel out here in America. If I were Black Lives Matter, I would feel incredibly insulted by the way that the Democrats are talking about the January 6th insurrection. Because what they are saying is that all of the impacts of the Black Lives Matter rallies, no matter how destructive they were, the Democrats are saying all of that was worth it, but the January 6th event was terrible. And what the Democrats are really saying to Black Lives Matter is, we are happy to pat you on the head for all of your outbursts as long as it doesn't threaten anybody in power, as long as it doesn't shake up the system and actually gain the possibility of forcing people to change, or at least forcing people to realize and to be shaken out of their complacency. It's actually incredibly insulting to the people. I know people who marched with Black Lives Matter, people that I love, and who really took that seriously. But what the Democrats have told them is that was all permissible. That was all even supported because we knew it wouldn't threaten people in power. We knew they had no possibility of changing anything. And the people who were harmed by the instability, the people who were dining in restaurants and all of a sudden had mobs of people attacking them, the people whose businesses were destroyed, the people who lost their jobs, the people who saw the icons that are so important to them, Christopher Columbus, Miguel Cervantes, all these statues torn down, all of those people and their sense of order and dignity, it didn't matter. It didn't count. It's different when it's the government that actually has to feel it. I think that if January 6th was worth anything, it was worth bringing all of that to light and making it so obvious and undeniable. I will be back next week with another episode. And as I said, I'm just going to bring up these captions one more time. Save the date, Wednesday, February 24th at 7 p.m. Your conscience or your diploma. We're going to have a roundtable with Eric Metaxas, John Zamirak, and myself at the Gatekeepers Online Twitter account, where the address is posted right there. There's a conference this Saturday on February 6th from 1 to 5 p.m. It's $15, but you can get a discount with the discount code Lopez. You can register at gatekeepersonline.com. And finally, join our discussion group online, www.gatekeepersonline.com/group/the big brown gadfly /discussions. And with that, I will leave you and I will see you